I want to talk about all of the different ways that we attempt to deal with our insecurities. And as you'll see in a minute, I guarantee you that there are at least a couple that you rely on pretty heavily, maybe every day. But I'll start with these 4 words up here. And then what I'll do is I'll separate them into 2 pairs. And I think often these pairs are seen as opposites, with humility thought of as kind of the healthier cousin of meekness, and confidence is kind of like the toned down version of arrogance. Or maybe arrogance is like confidence with chest hair, but just like tons of it. And even on places that aren't its chest. And these guys over here on the right, they're seen as this embodiment of strength. And as much as we praise humility in other people, there's kind of this aura of softness or weakness surrounding these 2 here on the left. What I want to argue, though, is that confidence and humility, they're essentially the same thing. They're manifestations of this same basic mindset. And that mindset is, I am inherently valuable, just like everyone else. That sense of security that comes with knowing that, hey, you don't need to earn your worth because you didn't earn it and you can't earn it. Just like if you were born a citizen, you didn't really earn that citizenship. Or just like when your parents hired that lawyer for you, you didn't really earn attorney-client privilege. And if you don't know what that is, that's basically where you can do anything you want to your lawyer, like yell at them or hit them, and they can't do anything back. And you might not even know you have attorney-client privilege, just like you don't know why they hired that lawyer for you, but it's there. And the opposite of that is where these 2 behaviors come from, this profound sense of insecurity. Meekness and arrogance, in a way, they are opposites, but really, they're just kind of 2 sides of the same coin, 2 different ways of grappling with insecurity. And insecurity, that's this core anxiety that I may not be valuable and good. Where security, that's the deep security that I am valuable and good. And this is one of the core struggles that we're born into this world with. We spend our lives vacillating between being pulled down here by the power of this core fear and then trying to lift ourselves up here and make ourselves believe emotionally what we've been told over and over again that we should believe intellectually. It's just that we're wired to believe that the stakes over this battle are so grave, so existential, that looking at this possibility directly, or looking at it on an emotional level, really staring it in the face, is so terrifying, so foundational, that we need to bury it as deep as we can possibly push it. Because if the foundation crumbles, well, everything else goes with it, or at least so we fear. So let's say this darkness here is more unconscious. And multiple studies have shown that the deeper you go into the unconscious, the louder the didgeridoo sound gets. It makes a lot of sense. And so what we do is we push this possibility down here so far that we rarely have access to it. But that doesn't mean that that fear isn't with us. It's just indirect and invisible. It's woven into the background of our everyday life so intimately that we don't really notice it. It's kind of like the water that the fish doesn't notice. And one of the ways that it makes itself known is by begetting some fears that are a little less foundational. And we have a little bit more access to these guys here. But even these thoughts, they're still pretty damning. They're still existential. They all start with this I'm a burden, I'm weak, I'm rotten. They're describing my whole self, like my essence. They're categorical. It's still pretty terrifying to stare these directly in the eyes. So for the most part, what we do is we keep them buried too. What we're most likely to be aware of, though, is the surface thoughts that arise from these. These aren't terrifying, but they're still highly unpleasant. And when we're caught up in them, or when we sense them on the horizon, our instinct is to vanquish that unpleasantness. And what I'm really interested in talking about here are all the different fun strategies that we use to escape that unpleasantness. So we started with those 2 core manifestations of insecurity: meekness and arrogance. And really, these are just examples of 2 different social strategies for dealing with the discomfort of insecurity. Arrogance, that's an example of an active asserting strategy. And then meekness, that's an example of a more passive mitigating strategy. We can kind of think of these as being on two ends of a continuum. And to be clear, really just focusing on social strategies for dealing with insecurity. And also, not even all of them, just some of the biggies. All right, so what does passive mitigating mean? Really, these are a pattern of dealing with that discomfort by just getting the hell out of there or avoiding the stressful situation altogether. Like, for instance, you structure your entire world so you don't end up in situations where you're like at an event where you don't know anyone, or where you're competing at something that you're new at, or where you're in a situation where you might be getting criticism, or you might be wearing too many turtlenecks and now everyone's mad at you. So here's some of the more specific strategies. These are all about avoiding and escaping. And all of us do these sometimes, but as I go through these different examples, you're probably going to have some go-tos that are your favorites. And if not in this section, maybe on the other end of the continuum, the ones that you'd really do habitually without thinking about it. So all of these deal with that threat of insecurity lurking beneath the surface by not giving it a chance to really flare up, escaping it and avoiding it. And just to highlight a couple of the ways that this shows up, you can, for instance, make sure you're not exposed by getting too much attention. Because even though praise feels good, whenever someone's saying nice things about you, well, that exposes you the possibility that someone else out there could raise their hand and say, hey, you know, like, they're actually not that great. Like, they kind of suck, actually. They ruin everything. Like, they know it. Their parents know it. I can't tell you how I know it because I'm their attorney, but just trust me, they're just so mean to me. All right, so let's not put ourselves in that position by drawing too much attention. Or take the strategy at the bottom there, making sure you don't disclose too much. Opening up about ourselves, that puts us in a position of being criticized. Like, you put something out there, you lose control of it. Like, who knows what other people are going to do with that information? It's more stress than it's worth. And some people, I think, particularly teenagers, a lot of times can take this to more of an extreme, a sort of like a fashionable nihilism, you know, packaging this up as indifference, making it feel like, oh, like this is an intentional ideological choice rather than what it is as a protective strategy. All right, but these aren't the only passive strategies for those of us who lean over here. Here are a bunch more that are about mitigating, really pacifying others so our worth or our value is safe from being attacked or at the very least scrutinized. You know, if we don't upset others, they are much less likely to call us out. And we might take some surface hits, like people dismissing us or ignoring us, and that hurts, but it avoids a direct assault on our sense of self, that kind of core of who we are. Or at the very least, that assault, it could always be worse if we pissed people off. And if we ask ourselves why we're avoiding a fight, like sometimes it legitimately is because we don't want to get like punched or fired or have to deal with a long argument or have to watch another compliance training video. It's just like, why don't you just get a swear jar like a normal company, all right? But a lot of the time, the answer really is about avoiding judgment or disapproval. Okay, and then finally on this more passive side, sometimes we push to work through the discomfort by turning inward with some strategies that are about just processing the thing to death. Indecisiveness, that effectively protects us from judgment or consequences by putting the decision off, right? Seeking excessive information, hoping someone else will make the choice for us. By acting, we take on accountability. We put ourselves out there to be criticized. Not taking that leap of faith, that protects us from exposing our core self to that. And then rumination, it's a little different than these others because it involves looking directly at the threat, all right? At least on the surface. It's like we turn the thing just over and over and over. It's like looking for some angle to diffuse it. But all the while, there is still this element of avoidance because we're looking for an explanation that doesn't involve us being fundamentally broken, that we're fundamentally stupid or socially incompetent or unlikable or whatever, like all the different versions of this. I may not be valuable. So basically, all of these strategies, they're about protecting that core sense of self from being attacked or exposed. Now, on the other end of the continuum are a set of strategies that involve being proactive and asserting, right? And these aren't so much about protecting, they're about earning or proving our value or worthiness, right? They're much more overt, they're easier to see. And they also happen to be a lot more fun, if we're being honest. All right, so here are some more obvious examples, and I think they're pretty easy to recognize in other people. Sometimes not so easy to recognize in ourselves, but it's this pretty straightforward strategy of elevating the self. Because if the unconscious is sending up fears of inferiority, well, just why not push back with the exact opposite message? And so, we all know what self-promoting looks like, or attention seeking, or, just like being as entertaining as possible, dominating a situation and taking as much as possible. That can also be a really effective way of telling yourself that you're top dog, right? And you cannot be worthless if you are that powerful, right? And you can't be worthless if you're wearing epaulets, or if you are little Lord Fauntleroy. That horse, look at that though, the AI really just nailed that horse. Right? And then really similarly, having social power or status, that's another really addictive way to reassure myself that I am in fact valuable. So compensation, this is a whole video in and of itself. It's a defense mechanism where we feel weak in one area, so we direct our attention towards overachieving in another. And so as you can see there, you can take pretty much any pursuit or virtue you can think of and just turn that into the bedrock of your self-worth. And probably for any number of these, you can probably think of people who've done that. And of course, the danger here is that this new area, it becomes so important that anything that we experience that threatens, like for instance, my intelligence or my physical desirability or my athletic prowess, it's met with this disproportionate amount of anxiety. It's like we have to protect these things from external and internal threats. So that creates the need for this whole new set of defense mechanisms, like intense competitiveness, right? Or, obsessively preparing ourselves against critiques, right? And then finally is pride. And this one is a little bit different than these others because it's not outwardly behavioral. It's self-talk about how just fantastic I am, how impressed other people were with me, like how amazing I was in that last meeting, or it's like how much better I am than so-and-so, or how big my burlap bag is, or how strong my gag reflex is, right? The difference between this and healthy positive self-talk is that here there's usually a comparative element, right? People, they're looking up to me. I'm wowing people. I'm better than, right? Elevating the self. Healthy self-talk, that's not about being on top. And often with these more assertive strategies, the whole idea of insecurity, that becomes repugnant. And so they involve pretending that insecurity it's not even there. And so any show of vulnerability or weakness in myself or even in others, any reminder that it's buried down there, that is met with disgust or contempt. Seeing weakness in another person, that reminds me of my weakness, which I've committed to shoving down outside of my awareness. And the more it's shoved down, the more threatening my mind interprets it to be. It's like, if we're that afraid of this thing, it must be dangerous, right? And therefore, the more defenses it creates, to the point where seeing emotional displays or tenderness, right, from others, that can trigger those defenses that create that kind of disgusted, contemptful reaction. And not to say that girls can't struggle with this, because they absolutely do, but boys in particular learn pretty quickly that this is the reaction they're going to get from other boys, or from their fathers, or from coaches if they show too much vulnerability or too much tenderness. And so what they do is they lock this stuff down real quick and real early, usually before they're even aware that they're doing it. And then what we also sometimes see is teen boys, they take this fear of vulnerability to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where there's actually a celebration of cruelty, where cruelty is a way to elevate your social standing, to get respect. And this segues really nicely into a much more ugly manifestation of that assertive strategy, which is, instead of elevating myself, is to devalue others, making me look better by comparison. And I say ugly, but we've all done this. We've all used this. Especially, like, remember back in middle school, like the burn book that you and Jesse Muldoon made in Mrs. Dipple's fourth period study hall. Like, so remember that book? Like how it got like a little too hot, like a little too quickly, and Jesse insisted you stop. But like there were just like too many burns that you hadn't yet set ablaze. All right, so, and they were like, oh, I'm out, right? This was fun in the beginning, but it's changed. Like, you've changed, right? And get out, you yelled, you coward, right? But they couldn't get out because they were in too deep. And also, you were both in the middle of study hall, and the only hall passes that Mrs. Dibble gave out were celebrity hall passes. And the only celebrity that Jesse knew was Susie Orman. And basically, that's the whole reason you started this burn book in the first place. Remember that? But these strategies, they become particularly toxic when they become our go-to strategies. It's like, why does it feel good to put someone down? Like, why is the brain rewarding us with dopamine for doing that? Well, it's because we're elevating our relative social standing. Evolutionarily, like, that was a really effective strategy for maintaining and building status, especially relative to people that we saw as our rivals. So in modern day, you can still get that little hit of pleasure by like making fun of the way that someone's dressed, or imagining putting them in their place, or imagining putting them in your burlap bag, right? It temporarily satiates that unconscious anxiety of not being worthy or valuable, temporarily. And then a supercharged version of this you see in just all sorts of social settings, right? You saw it when you were in school, you've probably seen it at work or other communities you've been involved in. It's taking these three and combining them in just this brilliant stroke of innovation to form gossiping. And so gossiping, it gives us that hit of pleasure for putting another person down, but it also gives us power and status, right? It's just like, I'm the one with the insider information. I can give it or I can withhold it. I could choose who to share it with. It's like people are going to think to themselves, what a social hub I am. It's like, hey, they must know some important people. It's just like, maybe they know where the treasure is buried. And it also gets you attention, right? Especially if it's juicy, right? You're engaging everyone. They're riveted by what you're saying. Like, you're the star of the show. It's like, how often does someone hear some secret information? They want to be the very first person to share it, because that makes it extra special. That makes me extra special. Now, this isn't the only reason we gossip. If you ask most people, well, they do it because they enjoy it. Nature built us that way. It bonds people. It spreads information that could potentially help your inner circle. But like we're talking about here, it's also a really powerful way to boost yourself up. Okay, and then you can also devalue people by criticizing them or blaming them. And then the very same thing with controlling or overpowering others, like making them smaller or subjugating them in some way, right? That must mean that I'm not worthless, because I'm better than they are. And then I wanted to finally mention a couple of other common tactics that are still about asserting, but a little different. These are about quelling our insecurities about our value by establishing a sense of belonging, seeking approval or praise. And, of course, like, everybody loves a sincere, thoughtful compliment. It's like, I definitely do. When someone stretches my arms out and tells me I'm so big, it's like, that is so empowering. But one of the dangers here is that each time we bask in the glow of praise for our performance or from some attribute that we have, it reinforces that assumption that our value is contingent upon performing, or it's contingent upon maintaining that characteristic. And so, what if we lose it? Or what if we start failing more than we're succeeding? Well, we better make extra sure that that doesn't happen. And so what we're doing is we're inadvertently reinforcing that contingent nature of our value and our worth. But it's tempting because approval, it feels great. You take, for instance, likes, shares, comments on social media, or if we can get someone's approval by doing something for them or fitting their expectations, talking about their interests or agreeing with their opinions, complimenting them, looking the way that they want us to look, right? These can all be really powerful forms of approval that help us feel like we belong. And then a related, perhaps not as common tactic, but still not rare, is that of fusing with another person. If I see this person as respectable or admirable and very valuable, well, if I can attach myself to them, right, that reinforces my value. And then this person as well, they can also serve as an external force to protect me from all those threats that my insecurities are throwing at me. It's I don't have to do it alone, right? And in moderation, this is actually a really useful strategy for struggling with our insecurities, because we actually don't have to do it alone. That is healthy. It becomes unbalanced, though, when we've surrendered so much of our sense of agency or so much of our confidence in our ability to handle life's challenges on our own that we're left with this very understandable but very intense fear that, well, what if I lose this person, right? And it becomes this existential threat at that point. Okay, and then again, this is an incomplete list of unhealthy ways that we cope with insecurity. And in particular, it's much more focused on social strategies. And I do hope it's been very clear throughout this that these are all very normal. Just because something's unhealthy, that doesn't mean that it's not normal. And vice versa. And there are almost certainly a bunch of these, if not most, that aren't even a temptation for you in the slightest. But there are also almost certainly others that are just so habitual, you've gotten so good at these techniques, you basically got a sponsorship deal. It's just kids have posters of you caving in on their bedroom walls. And if you're 16 watching this, just don't feel bad. You're still going to be doing the same crap when you're in middle age. And you're still going to be doing it when you're 80. It's just hopefully not as much. It's for most of us, our sense of inherent worth, it does tend to get stronger as we age. And, sometimes it's a little, sometimes it's a lot, right? And it's not to say that it can't go backwards either. But a lot of this growth, just tends to be organic. Our brain, it slowly learns that the things that we thought would be just this horrifying blow to our sense of worth, well, they're not actually that bad. And the things that we thought would be just this ultimate validation of our worth, well, those didn't quite do the trick the way we thought they would either. And I started this whole thing talking about humility, which, frankly, we don't seem to really talk a whole lot about, at least not in America. It's just, it's not very sexy. It's not very exciting. It definitely doesn't sell cars or phones. It's not a particularly intriguing characteristic for a main character in a movie or a TV show. It's why nobody's interested in your screenplay about that super humble guy who applies just a reasonable amount of lip balm every night before bed. But I do think it's one of the keys to sustained happiness, to the degree that's even possible, right? And when I think about what genuine humility is, I boil it down to these three beliefs. I'm not more valuable than anyone else. No one is more valuable to me, and nothing can change that. And I think vanishingly few of us ever really get to a point where we thoroughly internalize these 3 beliefs, but I do believe that we can get closer throughout our lives. And there are a lot of different ways to do this, but one is really just about being honest with ourselves about those insecurity staunching strategies that we use in our daily lives, and being honest about how they too often actually reinforce our deeper insecurities, even if they help us escape unpleasantness in the moment. And so if you are really interested in maybe curtailing some of your use of them, cognitive behavioral techniques are a really proven way to do that. And so I'll link below, because again, this characteristic, it's probably one of the best ways to improve the quality of not only your life, but the lives of the people you love. Because sometimes you're a bit much. Sorry.